Hello everyone and welcome to the latest of our Tech Tuesday briefings. This is our opportunity to go into a little bit more depth on one of our products or one of the markets that we serve. And today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. We're going to talk about military connectors and their commercial equivalents. Just a few housekeeping notes. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat. We won't answer them during the presentation, but we will make sure that if you ask a question, we will either get back to you directly or we can answer when we publish the video on YouTube. So there'll be answers for everybody. So please feel free to ask questions as we go along. So today we're going to talk about military specifications and COTS, or commercial off-the-shelf equivalents to those military products. And let's talk to begin with about what we're going to cover. We're going to look at what mil specs are and what they are around the world. We're going to talk about what they actually provide, because this is one of the key things that we find some customers get a little confused about. So we'll cover exactly what they provide and what they don't provide. Then we'll talk about the commercial alternative and how customers in the commercial, industrial, and sometimes even in the defense world can actually use commercial connectors rather than going down a mil spec route. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the solutions that we as Norcomp is part of the EDAC group of companies. We'll talk about some of the solutions we've got, some of which will be familiar, some may not so be. So let's talk about those towards the end. But let's start with military specifications and talk about what they are and potentially what they're not. A military specification is really just a piece of paper. It is paperwork that defines a product or a system. Now, they exist across the world, so many of us are familiar with the 4 or 5 digit numbers that get used by the US Department of Defense. If we're looking at circular connectors within the connector world, 38999 or 38999, as many people know, is one of the standards for circular connectors in our world. But there are standards. We have in the UK, we have DEFSTAN. In Germany, there are VG, and around the world, they are unique. They're unique to each particular country. Australia has their own, China, so forth. All of these standards exist. And let's talk about what they actually provide. The first thing that military standards provide is commonality. Now, there are standards for almost everything. There are standards for connectors that we're going to talk about. There are standards for computer systems. There are standards for clothing. There's standards for fuel. What they cover and what they describe is the product itself, how it's made in many cases, what it's made of, and a little bit about the performance that it should deliver. And the idea for a defense organization who have quite staggering logistic problems is that they can have a series of products that they can order, and it doesn't matter what manufacturer they come from. If they conform to the military specification, they know that it's going to work in whatever situation it finds itself in. This is true of individual nations. It's also true of the multinational type efforts that we see nowadays in peacekeeping around the world, NATO and various other organizations. The ability to have a common product that's shared between partner nations makes the logistics of finding these things and getting hold of them so much easier. So commonality is one of the things that these standards provide, and it's one of the most important things. And that leads us to the supply chain. It eases the supply chain problems that these defense organizations have. Imagine an Australian force working with its Singaporean partners somewhere in the Indian Ocean, and they need a spare part. The ability to use a standard notification for a particular product makes it so much easier to get hold of spares. So that's just one example. And the MIL standards provide that supply chain security for these defense organizations. It also describes performance. Now, and it's important that we get this in our minds, because performance doesn't necessarily mean superior performance. It's just that these things are expected to provide a certain performance in an application or in an environment in which they will find themselves. Defense products get used in some of the harshest environments in the world, And in terms of things like waterproofing and resistance to salt corrosion, for example, that's an important one in the world of connectors. Defense standards and MIL standards provide a shorthand for being able to tell you what a product is expected to be able to do. And the other thing, and it goes along with commonality, is the ease of use. A standard product is something that should be familiar to technicians around the world. So both of the products on the screen here, the crimp tool is to a defense standard, to a MIL standard. The contacts are to a MIL standard. They are of a common design, and therefore they have a common set of usage instructions. Defense standards even apply to how these things are labeled. So you'll see, for example, the contacts on the bottom right there, they have colored bands around them. That's part of the standard. It identifies the product, even if they've come out of the bag and they're dropping around in the bottom of the toolkit. By being able to label them in a known way, it makes them easier to use for the technician in the field. So these are some of the things that MIL standards, defense standards provide us. But there are one or two things that they don't provide. Now, the first is performance. We talked about performance a minute ago, but this is one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, in the industry, is that a defense standard or a MIL standard product automatically provides superior performance. And that simply isn't true. Now, some of these connectors are designed for very harsh environments. The picture shows connectors being used on the outside of an aero engine. These things are subjected to high temperatures, high vibration, and they are designed specifically for that world. But if we look at more standard products, they aren't any more capable than some of the commercial products that they are designed to replace. Let's just think about some of the products that we've looked at in previous Tech Tuesdays. The very first one we looked at was the push-pull connectors. And we described mating cycles. Now, mating cycles are one of the key ways that we metric how connectors will perform. One mating cycle is an insertion and an extraction of a connector, and the number of mating cycles gives you an idea of how long that product will last. A low-cost product that you might find from a high street store might last 10 or 15 mating cycles. A slightly better industrial product might last 50. A military spec circular connector, generally speaking, will be published at 500 mating cycles. But the push-pull connectors we talked about back in April, they can do 5,000 mating cycles. So it gives you an instant idea that military specifications are not a magic wand. They don't instantly provide superior performance compared to an industrial product. And that's important for users because of one or two of the other aspects of things that MIL standards don't provide. The next thing they don't provide is flexibility. Military specifications, military standards are defined over a long period of time, and there are certain products within those standards that you can absolutely get hold of. Thinking about the number of contacts or the size of the shell. But if you as a customer need something a little bit different, you need extra pins, you need fewer pins, you need the shell to be modified. If it isn't covered by the standard, you can't buy a MIL product. It just simply doesn't exist. Now, many manufacturers actually take advantage of this. The people who make these MIL spec connectors often make exactly the same product under their own proprietary part number, often on the same production line, using the same machines, the same tools, the same product materials and methods. But by publishing them as an industrial or a commercial part number, they can provide modifications that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get hold of. And that's one of the things that the EDAC group of company actually prides itself on, is the ability to work with customers to create something that's a little bit out of the ordinary by taking a standard product and modifying it. And as we say, it could be simply the number of pins it contains, leaving certain cavities unpopulated, modifying the shell type. These are things that simply you cannot get by choosing a MIL standard product. So flexibility is an important thing that you're giving up by going with one of these standardized products. The other aspect is cost. As I say, many of these products are made on the same factory floor and using the same machines and materials as a commercial product, but the requirements of these standards to be tested, to be labeled, to be packaged in certain ways inflates the cost. And that is an important consideration for any customer who's working in industrial and commercial situations. It's actually even a consideration for companies who are creating defense and military type equipment. If they don't need a mill standard product, then they can save money by using an industrial or commercial version. So cost is a big part of this. And it gives you an idea of why mill standard has potentially come into various people's minds as the ultimate product, but it has its limitations. And that's where we come to commercial off-the-shelf products. And we're talking about connectors today, but commercial off-the-shelf products are used across the board within the defense industry, where the defense industry can use something that's been developed. Let's look at the automotive world, for example. Engine controllers that are developed by commercial vehicle manufacturers are perfectly capable of controlling engines in fighting vehicles, for example. And so by using a commercially created product that has a proven track record, an enormous customer base, you're delivering a certain element of confidence. So commercial off the shelf is a valid and perfectly acceptable way of solving technical problems. And that's what COTS is. Commercial off the shelf has become, and COTS has become, a shorthand over the last few decades and has become accepted as an alternative to these military products that many people focus on. And the products, the performance that they deliver is at least comparable, and if not better, than some of those military products that you might otherwise go for. And the reasons behind that should be fairly obvious. The first is cost. The first is saving money by choosing something that's been developed for a commercial world. Commercial often means larger quantities. You're benefiting from the economies of scale. Think of a connector that's designed for automotive again, where there are literally millions being manufactured. It gives you that supply base and that long-term confidence that the costs are being kept to a minimum. By the same token, they are also more available. They are easier to get hold of. And so that is a big thing in terms of supply chains for commercial users. The performance is often the same as a military type product. They're often built on the same production lines, depending upon which manufacturer you're talking about. There are more options. They are more flexible. You can do more things with them. They are not hidebound to the standards. And that ease of customization is important for a big number of our customers. So let's look at one or two of the products that Norcomp offers. Now, Norcomp does not manufacture mill specification products. We manufacture equivalents that can be used by users in similar circumstances, but it's very important that we make the point that we do not make military standard products, but we do make the equivalents. And let's look at what is ultimately probably the grandparent of all commercial off-the-shelf products, the humble D-sub miniature connector. Now, we've talked about D-subs in a previous Tech Tuesday. D-subs were introduced in the 1950s, and at the time they were revolutionary. This was before microelectronics, this was before integrated circuits, and all of a sudden this slimline, low-profile connector with multiple pin options comes out and is embraced by the industrial world and very quickly by the aerospace and defense world. They've seen the benefits of this small size connector. It has a metal shell, so it's shielded. It can be made with machine contact, so it's reliable. All of these things make it fantastic. And this is, when I say this is the original commercial off-the-shelf product, that I think might be true because the defense and aerospace industry adopted it widespread. And there is now a military standard for this connector that actually came after the connector was designed. And in fact, there are more standards for D-subs than possibly any other connector in the world. There is a MIL standard, there are defense standards. There's even a NASA and a European Space Agency standard for D-subs that allow them to go into space. You can see that this is a commercial connector that provides things to all sorts of users. Let's look at one or two of the reasons why. They are very small and compact compared to the big circular connectors that went before, and they are still, even 60, 70 years later, a very well accepted way of providing high levels of connectivity where you need a shielded connector, a shell, in compact circumstances. Many of the Norcomp connectors that we have machine contacts. And when we go back to mating cycles, we talked again about machine contacts in the previous Tech Tuesdays. And in fact, what we'll do when we publish this video on YouTube, we'll put links to some of those previous Tech Tuesdays in the description so that you can go back, and when we talk about machine contacts and we talk about mating cycles, just to familiarize yourself with some of this terminology. But the shorthand is that machine contacts are more reliable than the stamped and formed equivalents that exist in the low cost world. And Norcomp connectors are available with machine contacts. And we have a huge range of options, not just in terms of connector size and contact count, but in terms of accessories, whether that's board mounting accessories, cable hoods, you name it. There are so many options that we can provide that make it easy for customers to adopt this product. We even have some products with stainless steel shells. Now, this is somewhat unusual. The mill standard that goes with these, M24308, has a section that includes stainless steel shells, and there are not many manufacturers that create D-subs with stainless steel shells. The shells are pressed using a very large press machine. Making them in stainless steel is difficult. And so there aren't that many manufacturers that offer that, and certainly not many manufacturers outside that mil spec community that do. And Norcomp has stainless steel shells. And the overall idea behind a D-sub is that they are well supported across the industry. They are familiar to almost every cable house, technician, designer across the world. Accessories and tooling is available across the world. They are a safe choice when it comes to designing a compact connector for electronics, and you do not have to choose the mil equivalent, the 24308 standard, to have the performance that you need in these challenging environments. Well, let's go from something that is very well known and very well accepted to something that is potentially not quite so familiar to us. Micro Ds. Now, Micro D is a couple of generations on from the sub D connector that we've just looked at. So miniature Ds went from standard density, and then the next step was to increase the density of pins using the same shell size. And so we went from 9 contacts in a shell to 15, for example, with the idea that as microelectronics became more popular, more contacts were needed, we needed to pack more signals into the same equivalent space. So high density Ds were the next step. Micro Ds were the next evolution of this type of connector. And this actually changes the shell type. These shells are about a quarter the size of a standard D-sub miniature connector. But they have many of the same features. They are still slimline, they are still low profile, they have cable and board mounting options, they have a metal shell for shielding. That's imperative for these kind of high performance environments. But one of the things that has happened over the years is, because of the nature of these products and because of the applications they get used in, many industrial and commercial users view these as purely a military spec product, and that isn't the case. There is a mil standard. It is 83513. That's one of the US mil specs. So these have got a military and aviation pedigree, but they are available as commercial versions, and that's what Norcomp can offer. So let's look at one or two of those advantages. It is a very small connector, certainly compared to a D-sub, which in itself is no huge monster. We're looking at a very much smaller connector, roughly a quarter of the footprint. It uses a smaller contact pitch. Pitch is the distance between one contact, the center of one contact, and its nearest neighbor. A D-sub connector uses something over 2.54, I think it's 2.77 millimeters for many of the pitch within that. Whereas a micro D uses 1.27 millimeters, which is 50 thousandths of an inch. Bear in mind, this was an American design originally, and we need to think in imperial. So it is very much smaller than a D sub, and so the overall size goes down enormously. It still uses the same technology in terms of creating contacts. Machined contacts deliver reliability. They are a high reliability connector, even if you choose an industrial and commercial product. We use machine housings because they are smaller. It's not suitable for a stamping operation, for a pressing operation. So many of the shells can be machined, and that again provides an element of reliability. But one of the key things here is the cost. Norcomp micro Ds can be as little as a third of the cost of those mil spec options that you might find from one or two of the big manufacturing names in the industry. And this has just evolved over the years. There is a perception across connectors that those big mill manufacturers are the only way of getting hold of micro Ds, and that absolutely is not the case. Industrial and commercial users can reap the benefits of this micro connector over and above standard D subs, while still retaining those high performance elements, the high mating cycles, the shielded shells, but they don't have to pay for the privilege. So if I leave you with nothing more from this presentation, I want you to go away and think, actually, there are options beyond D sub going down in size that are suitable for my industrial or commercial applications or my industrial and commercial type customers. These are products that are absolutely usable across the board. We can also do things like cable assemblies. We have the ability to create back shells and assemblies to go on the back. We can do overmolding. We have locking mechanisms. It is a very mature product range, and they are ideally suited for these industrial commercial applications that I've talked about. And so to summarize that whole commercial versus mil spec argument almost, but the perception in certain customers' minds that military has automatically got to be a better performance. And we've proven that's not true. The performance you get from a mil spec product is very predictable, but it isn't, as I say, a magic wand. It doesn't automatically provide you with a better product than going down a commercial route. And at Norcomp, we're able to provide you with any number of documents to provide performance data, materials data, test information to give you the confidence that you need to design with these products, even if it's in a tough condition. We're not compromising on performance at all because we're using the same technologies and the same techniques that those mil spec products use, but we're just applying them to a more industrial world. They are more easily available, like we say, because of the nature of how we make them and how we test them. We do not need to conform to some of those standards, and so they are easier to get hold of. Lead times are often lower, and we have a greater range of choice because we're not limited by what the document tells us we can do. And that also finally means that if you have a customer or you have an application who needs something a little bit different, come and talk to us. There's all sorts of things that we can do with very low minimum order quantities, reasonable lead times, and critically, we can put you in touch directly with our design team. If you need to talk about the details of how you want something to happen, we can absolutely put you directly in contact with the people who are going to be operating the CAD tools to design your connector. And that's just one of the examples of how working with the Norcomp team, and in fact the whole EDAC group of companies, that's the advantage that we can offer you in terms of that direct support. And then talking about the EDAC group of companies, the Norcomp range falls, excuse me, the Norcomp range falls within the EDAC group, and we have a number of other products that go along with it. This slide you've seen hopefully in previous Tech Tuesdays. It just gives you an idea of all of the different contact and connector arrangements that we can deliver, everything from card edge through to IO connectors, board-to-board solutions, and even things like USB and network jacks. We have a broad range of products, splitting them out into different families. This is the product range that we have available for you, and we can talk about any one of these. Some existing products that you'll be familiar with, the D subs are on there. Some newer products, the magnetic pogo connectors we talked about last month, the push-pull connectors we talked about in April. So we have a broad range of solutions that will help you deliver a solution to your customers or solution to your users with a range of different price points and capabilities. If you need to get hold of us, our contacts are available across Europe. If you need any specific questions, I would direct you to Tom. He has an in-depth experience of Norcomp, but please reach out to Wells, reach out to Chrissy, and reach out to Tom if you need any more information about whether it's the Norcomp Micro Ds, whether it's D subs as a whole, or the whole EDAC group of companies' products. Thank you so much for joining us for this Tech Tuesday. Hope that you found it interesting. We've covered something a little bit different. Normally we talk about products and applications. In this case, we're talking a little bit about that split between military and commercial. Hopefully we've given you an idea of the differences and the commonalities between those two, and given you food for thought in terms of using commercial products where potentially you might have chosen a military spec type in the past. Hopefully we can save you time, we can save you money, and we can give you some different options that you wouldn't otherwise have. Thank you once again. Join us again next month for our next Tech Tuesday. You'll get information about the topic later in this month. We look forward to seeing you then.